Welcome to our panel session at APMP BPC 2024 in New Orleans. This session is packed with information on how to succeed in international markets. I'm David Taylor and will moderate our panel discussion. Our panel speakers are Jennifer Hanna, Dwayne Baptist, and Bruce Feldman. We've picked some key topics to give you a taste of doing business internationally. Our closing slide has our email addresses if you want to learn more. Here's what we'll cover. Very often, your international proposals will require sending staff into foreign locations or hiring local nationals. We'll address overseas companies selling into the US market and the reverse, with US companies selling into countries around the world. We'll cover dealing with US and foreign government agencies. We'll also address HR challenges in different countries, working with foreign governments and their unique compliance requirements, and having to do live orals presentations to a foreign audience. We'll answer some questions on new capabilities using artificial intelligence. Our panel here today at APMP BPC in New Orleans brings diverse experiences where we have all succeeded in penetrating international markets and winning business around the world. I'm David Taylor and will be the panel moderator. Prior to entering the world of consulting, I enjoyed many years actively managing bid and proposal offices in London, Singapore, and the US. Later this morning, I'll talk about international orals presentations based on my personal experience in Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, and South America. Jennifer Hanna has lived and worked in Germany and the UK. Jennifer is a subject matter expert in bidding staff and managing HR issues in countries around the world. Dwayne Baptist has 13 years in the US Marine Corps and over 30 years in capture, proposals, and project management. Dwayne has helped European companies bid into the US military market for weapons technology. Bruce Feldman has opened a Center of Excellence for Low-Level Consulting to leverage the benefits of artificial intelligence. Bruce will answer questions about using AI in proposals. To kick off, I'll hand over to my colleague, Jennifer Hanna, to talk about human resources topics for international proposals.
Thank you, David, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Hanna, Principal Consultant with Low-Level Consulting Group. We are here today to present an overview on how to approach international proposals and some things to think about. I could talk about international HR aspects for hours, but as I only have a few minutes, let's get started. Working on an international proposal may seem daunting. I remember starting at one U.S. defense contractor in international human resources, and my new HR colleagues would share that they were never involved in the bid capture process. Most of the time, they ended up in the hot seat upon award, as generally things took longer than anticipated. I encouraged them to get involved, and they shared that they did not know what to even ask, let alone how they could help. I created an international BD checklist, that stands for business development, for them to gather the key facts at future meetings. These are the bullets listed here as a starting point to kick off the process. If you ask the right questions and get the right people involved early in the process, you can influence the timelines to set the team up for success. Each bullet will lead to further questions, but having the answer will help direct the next steps. For example, the type of contract will help determine whether or not there are any special exemptions that might be available. Combined with the period of performance, it will open up communication on the talent mix needed to fulfill the objectives. The talent mix typically consists of expatriates, local nationals, and the program management team. In most of the companies we work for, there is an existing infrastructure in the company. If you are bidding on international work to enter a new location, this infrastructure does not exist and you'll need to seek guidance. Don't be afraid of your corporate tax or legal departments. Each country has its own regulations with respect to immigration, employment law, tax, and payroll. In addition, there may be health and safety aspects that may have an impact on your talent pool. Understanding the cultural and geopolitical landscape will help determine the process, timing, and availability of talent and how to price it in the proposal. For example, if hiring local nationals, be aware of host country notice periods, which are generally 1 to 3 months, but could be longer. If you are taking over an incumbent contract, you may be required to take on 100% of the existing employees due to transfer of undertaking roles. For expatriates, the packages need to attract and retain the talent who will be successful for the period of performance at the host location and build in front-end immigration requirements. Sponsoring work visas may also require a capital investment or have quota requirements that have a cost and timing factor. Cross-cultural training for individuals and families relocating outside of their home countries, as well as for managers who will be managing these remote international teams, is highly recommended. If not taken into consideration, these oversights could erode profit margins. I'll hand off to Dwayne Baptist to talk about selling into the U.S. market.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Dwayne Baptist, a Vice President at Lofeld Consulting Group. Over the years, I've helped a number of foreign clients and companies with foreign subsidiaries do business with the U.S. government. Often, bidding on U.S. government contracts is a cultural change for foreign organizations. Tendering in much of the world is often more like what we might refer to as low-cost technically acceptable in the U.S. So when companies are bidding under FAR 15 or on task orders that incorporate best value elements in their evaluation, these organizations have a hard time succeeding. They might write compliant proposals, but they might not develop successful ones. Therefore, it is critical to help your foreign clients understand these differences and help them to build easily scorable strengths into their proposals. Classes such as Lofeld's Strength-Based Winning focus on teaching organizations how to plan and incorporate strengths into their best value proposals. When planning to source products and services from overseas, be aware of the FAR clauses in the RFP that affect sources of supply. There are a number of FAR clauses that prohibit sourcing goods or materials from certain countries. The Buy American Act is often a term or condition for domestic U.S. contracts. It applies to end items and has a number of exceptions, including for public interest or non-availability, and also for free trade agreements. So determine whether and how it applies to you and build those conditions into your proposal plan. Sometimes you might be bidding for U.S. government work that will be performed overseas. Proposals to the U.S. government are usually required to be written in English and priced in dollars. If you have necessary documentation that's in a foreign language, you'll need to have it translated and that translation certified. Also remember that local laws are usually also applicable. So for example, the Army Corps of Engineers, when looking to solicit work overseas, wants to know that you have or can obtain a business license in the country of performance, and that you can also meet the local laws with respect to construction and staffing. Finally, especially where technology or military products and services are concerned, you'll have to deal with EAR and ITAR. EAR and ITAR are regulations that govern defense-related articles and services and dual-use items that have both military and commercial application. Even dealing with the specifications for such items, as when developing a proposal, requires the obtaining of an export license if non-U.S. citizens will have access to the specifications. This applies even if you're bidding domestically but using green card holders. EAR and ITAR involve lots of extra regulations on how you handle, store, and provide access to those items or technical data. Terms like Technical Assistance Agreement, TAA, apply. So you will need to do your due diligence before undertaking such projects. Completing the required paperwork to gain access requires considerable time and training, so be prepared. In the most recent proposal where I worked under ITAR, it took us about 6 weeks to get the UK subsidiary of a US firm cleared. And it took about 2 weeks for Lofeld Consulting to complete the paperwork and train our proposal team so that we could work effectively with the subsidiary. Now, I'll hand it off to David, who will talk about selling to the non-US market.
Thank you, Dwayne. International business processes are all unique. What resonates will vary. The terminology will be different, starting with getting an invitation to tender, an ITT, instead of a request for proposal. Be sure you understand the nuances of the solicitation type, just the same as in the US, we distinguish between a proposal and a bid. Does the customer just want a price to do the work they've described, or do they want us to create a solution? Basic principles remain very much the same, such as stick to answering the exact questions the customer asked, not the questions you wish they asked. Ensure you are 100% compliant. Use the local words and terminology in the solicitation, not your internal or US jargon or sports analogies. And know your customer. Engage professional help for local laws and customs. When I worked on a proposal in the Middle East, I had to accept aspects of local law that seemed very unfamiliar to me. For my local labor, I, the employer, was personally responsible for any wrongdoing by my employees. I could go to jail. Also, I had to hire an office boy or tea boy to serve tea, coffee, or water for staff and visitors. These are not things we see in the US. It's essential to take local laws and customs into account when planning a foreign workplace. When you submit in a foreign language, consider providing bilingual material. Have the customer's language on the left and the English translation on the right. This technique helps maintain 100% synchronization for your English and foreign language versions. Version control becomes much easier with both languages in the same physical document. If you're translating from English to a foreign language, don't be surprised when the foreign language version takes much more space. This can be a challenge if your proposal is page limited. Use plain, simple English with short sentences that are grammatically correct. Avoid words that could be hard to understand for a foreign audience. Don't hesitate to use any local resources available to help you. I've had great success contacting the US Embassy in a foreign country to see if they can assist. Their mission includes helping US companies do business overseas. This is especially helpful if you are the only US company bidding. I once had to penetrate a competitor's monopoly grip on aviation telecommunication services in Japan. With help from the Washington, D.C.-based US trade representative, I elevated my capture and sales strategy to include US government assistance in high-level bilateral trade negotiations. We won. Your country's embassy in a foreign country can put you in touch with many local resources to help you. Check to see if there is a local chamber of commerce that can help you. In Seoul, Korea, I got support from the American Chamber of Commerce, a non-governmental entity with a broad mandate to encourage development of trade between the United States and Korea. With hundreds of local member companies, their reach was substantial. Next, Jennifer Henner will talk about global HR challenges. Jennifer, have you had experience in getting help from local embassies and government departments?
Thank you, David. Yes, I recall working on a NATO contract in the Netherlands. I sought help from the commercial attaché of the Dutch embassy to help navigate local registration, tax, and immigration requirements. They were extremely helpful and their support was free. I also invited them to our onboarding meeting with expats and spouses to share insights on life in the Netherlands, housing, schooling, and cultural differences. It was very well received and they were happy to support. Taking care of employees supporting international contracts is very time consuming. In many large companies where an HR representative may take care of 1,000 employees, in international it is generally 80 to 100. When taking care of expatriates, you are not just getting involved with the employees, but also their families. It is therefore critical for bid capture managers to involve HR early and understand timelines and needs. Establishing an entity and country is a long process, especially if you'll need to use it to sponsor immigration. Alternatives to doing it yourself include subcontracting the work or using a local employer of record to hire the talent needed to perform services on the contract. As a starting point, some of the best advice I was given when costing international talent was to assume everything is taxable or applicable unless otherwise exempt, and to work backwards from there, eliminating cost if an exemption applied. Some U.S. government and FMS contracts have special exemptions under a bilateral or multilateral agreement that may apply to help with immigration and tax. If these will apply to your contract, you will need to follow the processes to ensure your program and employees receive the exemptions. Otherwise, their status in country may be questioned, and it could have an impact on your bottom line. One of the oldest and most common multilateral agreements is the NATO SOFA agreement. Even though this is an umbrella agreement, each country under this agreement has nuances and may treat things differently. Please note that providing services under the SOFA agreement under NATO is very different than working for NATO directly, which is treated like a commercial contract. Getting employees to relocate under a U.S. government contract may be easier than to a far-flung location. It is important to understand the market for talent, how to attract and retain the talent, and at the right price. Providing the right level of support to enhance the user experience is also important, as the cost of a failed assignment can sometimes exceed the individual's annual salary and more. Selection, relocation, destination services, tax support services, immigration, and cross-cultural training are the top priorities to ensure you are setting up the employee for success. When going to a difficult location, socioeconomic factors and health and safety also come into play. Unaccompanied expatriate assignments may be needed, which add another level of complexity due to tax factors, especially with U.S. citizens. Now over to Dwayne to talk about working with international governments.
Thank you, Jennifer. Discussing how to deal with government agencies around the world could be a complete webinar series if we were going to go into specifics, and I only have a few minutes. So let's focus on the guiding principles that will help you figure out how to deal with your target agencies, whether in the U.S. government or around the world. The first thing to keep in mind is that people are people. So what motivates us all at the core is the same thing. People prefer to do business with people they know, like, and trust. Yes, it is possible, at least here in America, to bid and win something you pick up off SAM.gov in an agency where you've never stepped foot in prior to submitting your proposal. I've done it, but I can't promise you that it's universally true. But in my example, the key to winning such a contract is to build trust through what is presented in your proposal. This comes back to classic business capture practices. To win work around the world, you need to become a student of the business, a student of how government business is conducted in the country and the agency that you're pursuing. This may seem obvious, but you would be surprised at the number of businesses that have not even read the publicly available information on their target agencies. You need to know what are their goals and their objectives. You also need to understand their terms of art. If you do not do the research, you won't know. The same goes for the organization within the agency that is actually going to let the contract. You will need to demonstrate some familiarity with them, their goals, their issues. If you're going to create a proposal that's designed to demonstrate you know them and they can trust you. Also, know the rules. There will be things that you can do at certain times that you cannot do at others. As many of you probably know, for example, in the US, once an RFP has been released, you cannot talk to the sponsoring office about that acquisition. You have to go through the contracting officer. And since we've mentioned it, while it isn't always possible, try to get meetings with the people in the program office. but do this after you have studied the organization. I once heard the CIO of NASA say, with respect to booking a meeting with him, "Don't come to me in a meeting and ask me about my problem. I know what my problems are, and I don't have time to educate you on them. You need to come and tell me about how you can help me solve my problems." And of course, this needs to be done in the context of the culture that you're dealing with. Whether it is a foreign country or even an agency with a strong and distinct culture. As many of you know, our Department of Defense is a subculture in itself, and each service a dialect within the subculture. You don't have to be a veteran to win work there, but understanding and respecting the culture builds toward that principle of being someone they know, they like, and they trust. And now I'll pass it back to David to talk about oral presentations.
Thank you, Dwayne. Just as you might make proposal documents bilingual, make your presentation handouts bilingual. If you are presenting in English, expect your audience will have varying degrees of fluency with English. Provide bilingual slide handouts in advance so the audience can have a much easier time following your presentation. I've often had audiences who can read and write English, but seldom get a chance to hear and speak English. Be strategic with how your team is seated. You will likely have some people in your presentation team who are bilingual. Alternate how your team is seated so each person who has only English has a bilingual team member next to them. This can be very useful in a question and answer session. If traveling long distance, allow sufficient time to get over the journey and adjust to the local time. Get your business cards translated into the local language, but do be careful to verify that translation. I once did this in Tokyo, and my job title, Director of Air-Ground Communications, was translated as Director of Vacant Lots. Check ahead to see if visas are needed. Visas can take weeks or months to arrange. A good presentation technique is to have an interpreter with you. I've had great success with this. Engage an interpreter with the right business and technical vocabulary. Explaining complex technical material is not the same as ordering a meal at a restaurant. A simultaneous interpreter is a very different skill to being just a translator. Provide your interpreter with a copy of your slides and script well in advance so the interpreter can prepare any unusual words that are hard to translate. Freeze your slides and script early. Speak at a slower pace than if you are presenting to a native English-speaking audience. Aim for 120 words per minute or slower, instead of the more typical 140 to 160 words per minute. Use short sentences that are grammatically correct. Avoid long sentences with parenthetical phrases that are hard to follow. I prefer to speak a sentence or two, then pause to let the interpreter speak. But it takes about 3 times as long to deliver a presentation compared to using English only. So pick your style. Present in English, then have the interpreter repeat the material, or present in English only, or present in the local language only. I've frequently done the first of these, English followed by the local language. Consider presenting your opening introduction slide in the local language regardless. I've done this in Japan and it worked very well in establishing credibility and mutual respect with my audience. We won the deal. It helps if you can learn some of the local language common terms such as daijoubu, which is okay in Japanese. And now we'll hear from Bruce Feldman, who will answer some questions on using artificial intelligence in winning international business.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bruce Feldman. I've been asked by David and the panel here today to come in and talk to you a bit about how you can use generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI, to help you win business in international markets. So I'm going to take some questions and give you some answers. So the first question is, can AI tools help me with translating foreign RFPs into English and English RFPs into foreign languages? The answer is yes. Many of the generative AI tools that you're familiar with, what I would call foundational tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google Gemini and Anthropic's Claude tools, all translate language to language. I did a little study on Google Gemini, And as you know, Google Translate's been around for almost 20 years. And so there's really an immense amount of expertise that Google in particular brings to bear on the problem of translating documentation languages using machine learning. They use what's called NMT, neural machine translation. So Google does about 133 languages. Plus, it does pictorial and visual languages as well. So it's amazing the flexibility and power of some of these tools that are now embedded in or behind some of the generative AI platforms. ChatGPT, which is another tool made by OpenAI, I say only, does translation in about 20 languages. So yes, absolutely, these tools can help you with foreign languages. Is it important to have bilingual SME review of proposal content that has been converted for use in a new country and language? I think the answer is absolutely, it is essential that you have bilingual SME review of content. Generative AI, as well as it writes, and it writes beautifully, does have the limitation that it sometimes will hallucinate. You also cannot count on it being sensitive to nuance and, I would say, colloquial use of language at all times. I know some people find generative AI writing a little stilted or a little formal, though you can adjust style and tone. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the essence of it is, since you're working with language which does have nuance, it has to be culturally sensitive, you absolutely need to have a bilingual SME review proposal content, not only for just nuance and language and quality of use, but also just to confirm that all factual assertions that have been made in either language, regardless, are correct, because generative AI does have the potential to hallucinate or make things up. And Gen AI sets style and tone as well as translation of proposal content to be appropriate to the recipient country. So the answer is yes, it does. It says it can do that. And in fact, I've asked two of the OpenAI platforms, Google Gemini and OpenAI's ChatGPT, will it do that? It is culturally sensitive. So you can ask it not only to translate from, say, English into Portuguese, you can say, please make it appropriate to Portuguese as spoken in Portugal, as opposed to Portuguese as spoken in Brazil, for example. So it can be culturally sensitive. Now, if you ask a tool to just translate from, say, English to Portuguese, it doesn't ask you which cultural context you want it to be sensitive to. It just goes and does it. Who knows what the default is, and will it be immediately appropriate? So you need to specify that in the prompt or the instruction that you give to the Gen AI. It can also set style and tone. Now, style and tone is really driven a lot by word choice, the use of adjectives and adverbs, how much persuasive content you want to have in it. Really, it's about word selection. And Gen AI does do that very, very well. Does Gen AI perform equally well in converting text, including style and tone, between all of its trained languages? The answer is no, it does not. I base that on the fact that I asked OpenAI's ChatGPT to assess itself and its own ability to translate between languages. I said it does about 20 different languages. So it rates its ability to translate about 4 of its 20 languages as good. It rates about 4 of its languages as excellent, and it rates the remaining 12 as very good. Right? So even the tool itself recognizes that its facility in translation and using different languages varies from language to language. So again, you need that bilingual SME to check and make sure that you have caught not only accurate translation, but nuance and context as well. Can AI be used to put all resumes in a standard template for key personnel? The answer is yes. In the context of a prompt, you can give a resume template or structure, and then give as part of the context also, or have it actually do a search on or put into the prompt as well, let's say a street resume or a draft resume in one language, and then instruct it to convert that language by both, or convert that resume both in translation and in format. So you can do both. Again, with the proviso that you must have that bilingual SME check its work. Can AI translate resumes from one language into the required proposal standard resume template language? Again, the answer is yes. The thing you need to check is for quality, completeness, and accuracy. Are there any regulatory, ethical, or other problems in using AI tools with international proposals? Now, ethical is really a problem space unto itself. So I don't want to try to address that here in a panel that we're covering in a relatively short order here, issues with using generative AI just to help you win international business. Now, generative AI either knows about or can be sensitized to regulatory and other legal and statutory regimens of different countries. So, for example, in the European Union, you have GPDR, which is the European Union regulation. All the countries share it on privacy and data. Right? As it turns out, some of the generative AI platforms are already trained on GPDR or they're aware of it. And so they can help you identify issues in, let's say, your draft submission that will incur obstacles or run into problems when being proposed then into the regulatory regime in the European Union. Now, other countries have their own regulatory regimes. You will need to educate the Gen AI, probably by using retrieval augmented generation, taking those statutes and regulations and inputting them to the Gen AI as part of prompt development and perhaps part of training or fine tuning, depending on the model that you're using. So there are, I would say, issues to be addressed. Do they rise to the level of problems? I don't think so. They certainly are addressable. Whether the generative AI addresses them to your satisfaction is really as much a matter of prompt engineering and the expertise that you can bring to bear on the problem. Can Gen AI review proposal content and identify areas where content may need to be adjusted to comply with international standards for data protection, such as the EU's GPDR? And as I just mentioned on the previous slide, the answer is absolutely yes. You may have to input the GPDR or the other regulation that you're thinking about into the Gen AI session, so it's aware of it, has the information and language relevant to it. But once you've done that, once the Gen AI large language model either is trained on or is aware of the regulation, you can then say, please assess my proposal for any issues relevant to regulatory concerns. Can Gen AI review proposal content and identify areas where ITAR compliance needs to be confirmed? Again, the answer is yes. You need to make sure that your Gen AI is aware of, and that by that either trained on or has present in your session information on ITAR, so it knows what the compliance issues are. And it could also apply to the export regulations such as EAR as well. All right, but once you have that information in the session, the large language model in the Gen AI platform can then work with that information to identify proposal content that might incur issues or approval requirements for your final submission. How many languages can AI tools use? I think I mentioned earlier, the answer is it depends on the tool. You can actually ask the tool. That's how I found out about OpenAI's ChatGPT current capability to work in about 20 different languages. And by work in, I mean, that includes translate between and any pair of languages in either direction. Right? I mentioned before Google Gemini, incorporates the Google capability from Google Translate, 133 plus languages, an amazing capability there. Other platforms may vary. If you're looking at using generative AI, ask your platform. How many languages do you speak and can you translate between them? Which countries are embracing AI as much as the US and which countries are averse to using AI? I would say it really varies. By the way, when I say embrace as much as the US, some countries I think are embracing it more than the US. So it's not just a matter of setting the US as a benchmark. I think the European Union's regulatory regime is very progressive, and I think is really, among other things, designed to encourage people to use generative AI because it's a very powerful capability for enhancing productivity and creativity in your proposals. Now, other countries outside the EU place more emphasis on safety or internal security, and they're establishing more stringent regulatory regimes for exactly the same reason, because generative AI writes really, really well, writes beautifully and creatively. You can ask it to write almost anything, and it does it very, very quickly, generates high quality drafts at great speed. Those countries that are concerned in their environments about social media and people publishing are establishing stricter, more stringent safeguards on the use of generative AI. And I'm not making any value judgments here, except I happen to be, favoring the more progressive use of generative AI. I think once you understand its limitations and capabilities, you realize that a lot of the threat language we hear, some of the, concern we hear in the media is really overblown, at least with the current generation of tools. Well, AI tools help me eliminate technology that is difficult to understand in a foreign language. Yes, generative AI can help you with that, but you will need a bilingual SME to ensure that it's being done correctly and effectively. You'll have to identify the terminology and then Ask the Gen AI to work with you on defining either suitable target language so it translates effectively, or identifying the specific technical terminology. If your generative AI is not domain aware for the topic of your proposal, it may not be able to define terminology. You may have to provide that information as well. If I'm based in the US and preparing a proposal for a foreign audience, is it better to use an AI tool from the destination audience country? I hadn't really benchmarked or tested this to really explore it, but my initial thought is I'm not sure it really matters if you pick a Gen AI model that is, developed primarily in one language and translated into another, or if it's the other way around. In any event, you need to have a bilingual SME check the results for nuance, context, and accuracy. Thank you all very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you, Bruce. Our email addresses are all on the final slide you'll see. We welcome your questions. In closing, knowing local customs and taboos improves your success in international markets. I experienced this firsthand in a negotiation meeting in Tokyo. Westerners hate silence in meetings. We want to jump in and to keep the conversation going. In Tokyo, the local participants often sat in silence, carefully considering what I had said, carefully formulating their next words. The silence was uncomfortable for me, but it was an element of respect for thoughtful conversation versus off-the-cuff responses. You need to know how to honor local culture for a successful international business meeting. We have 50 copies of this excellent book available at the Lofeld booth. Please stop by, let us know your thoughts on international business, and enjoy a copy of Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. Now, some further closing comments from Jennifer and Bruce. This slide has our email addresses. If you have any questions or would like to follow up with any comments, please email us.
Just in closing, I will leave you with 5 things. Get HR involved early. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Build realistic timelines for compliant talent deployment. Assume no exemptions apply and work backwards. Understand the host country culture. Treat others the way they want to be treated.
Well, first of all, David, thank you very much for hosting the panel today. If I can emphasize one point for our audience, something that's really key, and I think I emphasized it during the question and answer session I did before, is you will need to have a bilingual SME check the work that Gen AI does in its translation. You need to have a SME check the work that generative AI does anyway, somebody who's domain aware and understands if there's missing nuance, or even to address the possibility that your generative AI is hallucinating, that is, making an assertion that is not factually correct. The same holds true for translation, with the additional overlay of cultural context and word meaning from translation.
Thank you very much for joining us.